let's get started. Again, my name is Chris Lema. If you want to tweet anything I say on Twitter, my handle is exactly the same as my name without the space. So Chris Lema, Lema. That's how you can find me on Twitter and how you can retweet any of my quotes. And so with that, let's get started. You're looking at the title screen, right? And now we're going to go, and I'm going to say that I'm guessing that you have probably been getting emails about privacy policies. A recent study interviewed people and said, hey, why are you getting all these privacy policies? And 60% of the people thought, oh, I'm getting it because of Facebook, right? Because of all the issues with Facebook recently, that's why getting it, right? Another 15% were like, I have no clue what's going on here. And only 25% of people said, no, this isn't really about Facebook, right? And they're the ones that are right? It's because of GDPR, not Facebook, right? The magic day is May 25th, right? May 25th is when we expect the whole world to fall apart, and that's because people aren't ready, right? And so in not being ready, there's actually two kinds of people, right? People who feel unready and people who feel pretty ready and have no idea how unready they are, right? Either way, May 25th is coming up fast. And so that's why we're seeing everyone from MailChimp to Stripe to everybody else prepping, paying attention, creating ebooks, creating webinars. This is potentially the 14th webinar this month that you've attended, all related to GDPR, which begs the question, hey, what does GDPR stand for, right? Like, I'm hearing the acronym, I'm hearing people talk about it. What is it? It is General Data Protection Regulation. And if you're thinking, right, oh, this is cool. What's the most important word in that realm? The big word here at the bottom is regulation rather than directive, right? So it's not like, throughout the EU there haven't been, and there overall process around privacy and data protection, but before it was a directive. And 2016, I think it was in April, everything shifted to a regulation, which now becomes binding and important here on May 25th. And the difference between the directive and regulation, among many other things, is penalty, right? There's some teeth to this. I am not going to spend a lot of time on teeth because that's not the main point of what I want to spend time talking about. There are penalties, and that'll raise the question when you start thinking about penalties. It raises the next question, which is, well, how is someone going to come collect from me? We're going to address that towards the end of this, right? So we'll talk about that in a second. But this is what GDPR stands for, and I can't really do the rest of this presentation without first telling you that I'm not a lawyer, right? I am not a lawyer. I've never trained to be one. I don't play one on TV. And here's the good news. I'm not giving you any legal advice. This is not a webinar on legal advice. If you need a lawyer, there are a lot of people out there. Of course, my friend Ryan Kinney runs the Kinney firm, and so you can go check them out. But this topic we're going to talk about, and the particular angle that I'm going to spend time talking about it, right, doesn't have to do with giving you legal advice. All right. So the first question most people talk about when they're talking about GDPR, other than what the heck is it, is does it apply to me, right? And my general answer is, hey, if you're selling something and people are buying it, and some of those people are in the EU, then it probably applies to you, right? Now, I know there's a whole lot of people that are you run blogs, you do affiliate links, there's other things, but this particular webinar where we're spending our time is we're talking about WooCommerce. And the thing about WooCommerce is that for the most part, unless you're doing something really strange, at the end of a transaction, you send people a receipt, and a receipt is proof that you sold something to someone somewhere else, right? And so if you send a receipt to someone in the EU, that's pretty much all the proof they need to be like, oh yeah, you were selling to the EU, right? So this probably applies to you. But the main thing I'm going to try and tell you, right, is even if it didn't apply to you, right, you ought to be paying attention to this. And we'll get to that in a second. But let's talk about what this thing is, right? what is the GDPR, right? This is where we're going to camp around these for a little bit. You should know that the entire regulation is a whole lot of chapters of content. And so what I'm going to do is cover a lot of these different rights, and I'll point you'll see that line that says you can read more about this in articles blank to blank, right? Articles 12 through 14, or articles 15 and 16, or article 17. The reality is there's a lot of stuff you can read about. And I do recommend that you get a lawyer. I do recommend that you sit down with a lawyer and you read it over together, right? Make a fun time of it. But at a high level, right? What are all these rights that now are coming into play? People are suddenly caring about and saying, yeah, you know what? We really need to protect this stuff, right? So the right to be informed. Let's talk about what this means, right? This is the right to know in plain language what data is being collected and how it's being used, right? A lot of data and data processing. Here's what we know already, right? I use a very special email, right? If you've gotten email from me, you have likely gotten email from my Gmail account, or maybe my Chris Lema account, that's chris@chrislema.com, right? If you've gotten those, you're my friends or you're people that I'm doing business with. But if you got an email that is christian.fernando.lema@chrislema, you're pretty much someone that's a stranger to me. How do I know this? Because I only use it on certain websites, right? I only use a certain email on certain websites to make sure that I know, right, what's going on with that email. And here's the crazy part. I get people emailing me to that email account, right, talking about things they know I've purchased or they want to sell an add-on or insurance to or whatever. And I'm like, there is no way that I gave you my info. How'd that info get there? Well, I'll tell you, right? I put it in one place, that place stored it, that place decided to sell that list to someone else who bought it, aggregated it with a bunch of other data, and sold it to someone else. And the only way I know is because they're not using my regular email, right? And I go, oh, I can trace how this played out, right? But the truth is, I don't love that. You probably don't love it either, right? And so the right to be informed is all about this notion of, hey, before I put my information in somewhere, right? What are you doing with it? Where's it going? How long are you storing it, right? How are you using it, right? And this notion of plain language is really important, because how many of us have gone to terms and conditions, right, and privacy policies on websites and gone, whew, that's a lot of legalese. I don't know what that means, right? I don't know what I've read this whole thing and I still don't have a clue, right? And so you go, okay, plain language means it's really, really easy to read, right? So plain language, right? We're talking about plain language, and plain language is the notion of having to rewrite that policy so that people know exactly what's going on, right? If you're collecting information and then you say, right, and it can be simple, right? Hi, when you subscribe to our newsletter, right, we take your first name and your email and we pass it to our email service provider, comma, MailChimp, comma, right, and store it there so that we can send you, email. Because we do this to the double opt-in confirmation, you have already received a second email from them. In that link is a link to unsubscribe. It's also a link to manage your preferences. You can control your preferences and remove yourself anytime you want. That's plain English, right? I couldn't even make up what the legalese would be for that because I'm not a lawyer, which I already told you. But the truth is, most of the time we read these policies, we don't read plain language, right? So the right to be informed, a lot of that comes into your policies, right? A lot of that comes in the write-up, right? Also, when you're collecting information, right, you want to make sure that you're letting people know what I'm going to do with this, right? So if they're filling out forms on your site to collect stuff, right, something to think about. The second one, the right to access your data and the right to fix it, right? In Article 15, we talk about the right to access it. In 16, it talks about your ability to go in and make changes to it, right? The ability to correct your own information. I can't tell you, right, how big a deal it is to let people get at what they're doing, right? And we'll show you some examples of this and how this plays out. But most importantly, right, if you're using WooCommerce, you already know people can go into the My Account, right, /my-account, if you haven't changed any of the permalinks, and they can go there and they can go click and look at their orders, right? They can go click and look at their subscriptions or things that they have access to. And so you're part of the way there, right? But if they have their personal information, that's another thing they can go and do, right? They can go and look at their information. They can make changes to it. So you're a good part of the way there for WooCommerce specifically. But what happens when you start doing other things, right? What happens when you start creating memberships or online courses or other things and you're using other plugins? Not every other plugin exposes all that information, right? And so we'll talk about that. The right to be forgotten, right? The right to be forgotten and erasure, right? The notion that I can come in and say, hey, I want my data deleted from you, right? This is probably one of the areas that we have the most amount of work to do across WordPress and WooCommerce, is because, fundamentally, first of all, you can't delete everything, right? You can't delete an order that hasn't been provisioned, right? Because fundamentally, I still got to wait I need to know where to ship the product if I'm getting it and it's back ordered and I got to get it through, right? So there is some nuance, and of course, the laws don't set it up in such a way that we're hamstrung in that, right? We can use real and normative intelligence to navigate through these situations, but still, if a person hasn't purchased from a while and they come in and they go, no, after I downloaded all my order data, I really would like to remove myself from your system, right? This is part of GDPR. We have to be prepared and ready for this, right? Now, here's the crazy thing, right? In a European survey, the tail end, December 2017, they asked people, hey, do you plan to query and or delete your data, right? When this kicks off, right? Are you interested in doing this, right? And 9 out of 10 people said, oh, heck yes, right? I want to see stuff, right? I want to see stuff. I plan to go check in. I am, I want to know what you have on me. And the crazy thing is we think it's going to be something crazy, right? Magical. But for the most part, it's not, right? It's not magical. It is just our interest in knowing, hey, you've been collecting data on me. I sure would like to know, right? What do you have, right? Are you collecting stuff like my orders? That's great. I'd love for you to know orders, right? But on the flip side, are you collecting something like how long I spend on each page of your website? Or are you collecting which things I've spent a lot of time looking at but haven't bought yet? Or are you collecting how many different forms I've filled? Like, what are you collecting? So people are interested. They want to know, and so we have to be prepared for them, right? We have to be prepared and think through, what does it mean that people are going to want to come in and have access to their data? They want to be informed how you're using it. They want to have access to it. They want to fix anything that's wrong. And frankly, they may or may not want to completely be removed from your system. There's more rights, right? The right to data portability. And I got to tell you, I was talking to my daughter is 12. She's getting ready to go into high school. And last summer we sat down and we were talking about, ideas to run we're gonna start a company so that she runs a company while she's in high school. And so I said, okay, let's talk about, what are problems out there and what would we, what might we like to build out, right? And so we said, okay, what would be great is e-commerce data portability, right? The ability for me, I love headphones, right? I want to buy headphones from someplace, right? And then turn around and take that data and say, okay, I'm done. I'm like, I no longer am going to buy headphones at Amazon, but I would like to show all the headphones I've already bought at Amazon. And I'd like to take it to Bose, or I'd like to take it to Sony and just give them my information so that they can then make better recommendations and not recommend the same headphones I've bought over and over again, or ones I've already purchased, or whatever, right? You go, wouldn't this be great? We're a long way off from that still. But you go, yeah, this is fantastic. First of all, I'd like to pull it down, but more importantly, I'd love to transfer it. I'd love to make it easy. Some of you went through the early years of being on Aweber and then MailChimp, or MailChimp and then Aweber, and trying to move those lists from one to another. And you remember how painful it was to move systems over, right? And you go, oh, this is a pain in the butt, right? And in some cases, right, if you went one way, I think it was if you went to from MailChimp to Aweber, you didn't have to opt everyone in again, right? You just move it straight over. But if you went from Aweber to MailChimp, they were requiring you to get everybody to opt in again, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna lose some of my folks on my mailing list, right? So portability is important. It's going to become more and more important, right? And so thinking through what are the generic formats by which we export data, right? Order data, preference data, whatever, and get it into other stores, right? Then of course you have in Article 21 the right to object to processing personal data. Now here's the thing, right? It's not I can say please don't include me in your system, but then get booted out of your system. It's really more about I want to be able to navigate your system and still not have you collecting all sorts of data about me, right? Or processing data about me. Think about if you go to Amazon, right? In Amazon, as you're browsing, one of the things they can show you is a recommendation of products based on what you've been looking at in this session, right? And so as you're moving around, they're collecting some data. It can still be anonymized data, but it's based on you and your browsing path in that visit, and it shows you that. Now imagine that you go, hey, I don't want that. It doesn't mean you can't use the rest of Amazon. It just means, okay, we're not going to show you these recommendations because you have opted out of stuff, right? We're still pretty early on in the process of a consistent way people do that, right? Across WooCommerce, there's a ton of different ways. And frankly, one of the challenges, right, is that every plugin has done things their own way. And so this notion of how are we going to get our stores to all think about and take exception to, or allow customers to take exception to some of the ways we're using their data, this is going to be work, right? And it's not just work for the store owner or the store developer, it's also work for the people who build the plugins. And lastly, the last one of these that we're talking about is the right to be informed of breaches, right? That when something happens, right, we should know. We should know. We should be told. We should be told quickly. In 72 hours, I want to know what's going on, and I don't want to wait 6 months and then find out, because you were trying to keep it on the low because you didn't think it was that big and you weren't sure anything got hit. But then after time, you found out something, but you weren't sure how much, and so you kept waiting. And you're like, oh my goodness, right? How about you just actually tell me what's going on? Now, here's a challenge, right? Is that in the world of GDPR, there are controllers and there are processors, and we don't have to get into all the nuance of these things, but we'll talk about this in a little bit, right? Is this notion that even if that breach happens, right? And we'll come back to the notion of controllers and processors, but even if that breach happens on one of your third-party systems, one of your partnerships, right? The data that's held over at a MailChimp, right? But if something happens at MailChimp, but you've been putting all your customers' data into MailChimp, right? Then you have to turn around and because they came in through you and it went back over to them, you have to know someone at MailChimp, right? Someone at MailChimp has to know who you are. That communication has to happen, so they let you know, and you have to let your folks know, right? And so you go, oh wow, this means I have to be really paying attention to who I'm partnering with and who the points of contact are, so that we can make sure that this information can get out the door, right? And this is a big, big challenge, because a 2018 study by Senzing found that small and medium businesses, right, in general, on average, store data across 18 different databases. And larger companies, the average goes up to 43. So when we talk about data portability or data removal requests, there's a cost associated with all of this, because frankly, we've been building solutions super easily by going, oh yeah, I can have WordPress and WooCommerce, and then I turn around and I throw in MailChimp, and that'll hold some data. And I also have some personalization stuff, and so I have some data over with them, right? And then I also have some couponing, but I use a third-party system because they do raffles and other stuff, and so I have it over there. And all of a sudden you realize, oh man, I have data everywhere. So when someone comes back and says, hey, can you show me what you've collected on me? I have to aggregate all 18 databases and show you one consolidated look. Or when you say you want to be removed, I have to go and get you out of all these systems, right? You're like, okay, wow, this is going to be some work, right? So it is, one of the challenges with particularly around e-commerce stores, right, is that there's a lot of moving parts. And when we were building it, right, or if you're a store owner and someone else was building it, when they were building it, right, you got into this dynamic where you realized people were moving quickly. People were sometimes moving at the, to assemble the best consolidated product off the cheapest, components just to make it all stick and work. And they're using third-party products. And all of a sudden you realize, I don't really know all of the different pieces. And I don't really know what's going on, and I don't know their policies, right? Wow, this is going to be work. So what I want to do for a bit of our time today is to talk to you about where all this fits in, how it fits in an e-commerce context, right? Because again, we are not the ultimate say in GDPR. Again, to remind you, I'm not a lawyer, but more importantly, to remind you that there's a ton of people out there who are writing great articles. There's a ton of people doing webinars. We don't hold any special place to say we're the only people who can do this. But where we want to spend some time talking it through is, how does it sit in an e-commerce context, right? So right now, if you look at the blue circles on the screen, right, you see how people navigate through a regular e-commerce store, right? They go, prospect hits your store, then they browse your store, they add something to their carts, they go forward into the pay and checkout. From there, they get an email, which is their order receipt, and it may give them a link back to the My Account area to view, access, or download something that they have a right to. That's their flow, right? And then we ask the question, hey, in all of this, where will the GDPR have an impact? And as you can see, the answer is everywhere. All right. If you're thinking about GDPR and you're wondering, okay, where does it fit in the context of an e-commerce store, right? The answer is just about everywhere. Because when someone lands on your site, right? When they land on your site and they start navigating through it and they're browsing things, are you doing something? You may not be, which is great. But if you're using a fancier product that does upsells, cross-sells predicated on your browsing history, or if you're using something that is attempting to profile you, right? Behavioral profiling, right? And we're not talking about demographic profiling where you have to give it information and then it uses that. We're not talking about profiling based on transactions that you've already made. We're talking about, if you're talking about behavioral profiling, where people are going, oh, based on how many seconds they spent here, and based on, these are slightly more expensive systems, and you may not be doing it, but if you are, guess what, right? It would make sense that you would want to let people know that this is what you're doing, right? Now, it used to be that private data was stuff like your first name, your last name, your social security number. Private data was stuff we all thought of as private data. Like you just, and let's be honest, right? We started foregoing some notion of private data a long time ago, right? You can find Chris Lema all over the internet, right? And you go, yeah, I'm not in control of that anymore. It's just kind of everywhere, right? But that's different than my social security number. That's not everywhere, right? You go, no, that's private data, right? Maybe you think of your gender, right, as private data, but for the most part, I don't know that a whole bunch of people ever thought about their IP address as private data, right? I don't know that we all want walking around going, oh, I don't want you doing anything with my IP address, right? And you go, Oh, well now, if I'm profiling predicated on that IP address, I may have to get something, right? Um, Now here's a beautiful thing, right? Uh, there are ways, right, that you could like. I know countless stores whose entire store is sitting behind a paywall, sitting behind a partnership barrier, sitting behind something that you have to log in, um, because they're either getting wholesale prices or because it's an extension of another partnership or what have you, right? They're not really selling to the general public. And in that model, you can make it part of the, articulated, explicit agreement that says, this is what's doing. And we're going to talk about consent in a minute, but this is what we're going to do. This is how it's going to work, blah, blah, blah. And if you log in and you browse our site, you're right, this is one of the ways that we understand that you have already done this. But of course, you're collecting consent when they actually sign up, right? So they're clicking a button. It's affirmative action, that they are good. But you're saying, hey, this is what's happening in this realm. And so then you don't have to worry so much, right? But if you're out in public and you're doing some profiling and you're using some fairly elaborate systems that do this, yeah, you'd potentially have to disclose this, right? You'd have to say, hey, heads up. And you'd have to let people bow out. And you'd have to let people, people keep using your system while bowed out, right? And so you go, oh, we've barely crossed into the very first area and gone, oh, yep, I have to think about this, right? But then, right, someone goes and adds something to their cart, right? And this is one of those things we were talking about with our partner at Jilt when we built our managed WooCommerce hosted offering. We went and partnered with Jilt that does cart abandonment. And one of the things you can do when you're, going to add an item to your cart is it'll ask for your email, right? And we said, hey, this is awesome. And this is not just Jilt, this is everybody. Hey, we just want to make sure that you are looking at GDPR and that you are paying attention to what kind of consent people have when they're giving us their email, so that it's not that generic, like, hey, you know what? Give us your email so we can give you a coupon. And you're like, no, no, no. It's give me your email because I'm planning to send you 14 emails over, and Jill doesn't do this, right? But the notion that I'm going to follow up with you because you left it in case you leave it in your cart, right? Thankfully, the folks at Jill were like, yeah, we're totally on it. And you're like, okay, good news, right? But it's happening, right? There are a whole bunch of people who are doing cart abandonment solutions, and many of the plugins that do it, right? I personally am a big fan of SaaS products that do it. I trust them, and also from a performance perspective, it's not like I'm using my own e-commerce store resources to to process this work, right, and to send out emails. So I prefer a SaaS, and many of the SaaS that we've talked to are actively doing work on in this area. But some of the plugins that you can buy for $29, right? You go somewhere, you go to an Envato marketplace, and you type in abandoned cart, and you find, oh, here's a plugin for $29 that'll do everything I want it to do. There are some of those that I haven't seen an update at all about, right? And you go, yeah, I'm not sure I want to use this solution for that, right? Then let's say the customer goes and does a checkout, right? And we collect data at checkout, but we collect some data that we don't even need to collect, right? Like, yes, I need for sure, I need your name and address, city and zip if I'm shipping you something. If I'm not shipping you something, do I need all that? Probably not. If I'm not shipping you something, do I even need your last name? You go, oh, yeah, no, I don't think you actually do. Great. Take it away, right? Because if you don't need it and you have no plans to use it, don't keep it and don't store it, right? Same thing with phone numbers, right? In a lot of checkouts, we have phone numbers and we're like, yeah, because just in case. And you're like, because just in case is not necessarily what I want when I'm collecting data in a new world of privacy. I would rather, no, I don't have your number, right? So I'll send you an email about this. And if you need to come change your email, come change it. But no, I don't know, and I don't want to know. I don't want to have your phone number because I don't want to store it. I don't want to keep it here. And I don't want someone who breaks in to have access to it, right? So you have to ask yourself in your checkout, am I collecting too much data that I don't need, or frankly have no interest keeping, right? I know at some point you worked with a consultant maybe who said, oh, while you're here, you might as well collect blah, 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 right? And it was all the things you might collect. And now you go talk to a consultant, right, or a lawyer, and they'll go, if you don't need it and don't plan to use it, don't have a way that you're regularly using it, maybe don't collect it, right? And then you go, okay, I sent out the receipt. Now, right? I go, oh, hold on. I put some of that data, right, into another system to send that receipt, right? I have transactional services I use to send receipts, right? Or I have newsletter stuff, right? And you go, oh, wow, there's a whole lot going on in here with my partners that I got to be paying attention to, right? And so in that realm, you have to look at it and go, who am I using for email? Who am I using in any other partners that I need to be paying attention to do this, right? And by the way, you know this already, and we're going to talk about consent in a second, but when someone places an order, the intent of their order is to buy stuff from you. That's the intent. The intent is not to get on 62 different newsletters, right? So we need to be explicit about what they actually are consenting to. I'm consenting that I bought this pair of boots and that you're going to ship me this pair of boots. I'm not consenting to get onto all of your email lists, which means they have to have proper consent, right? Proper consent. So what does that mean? We're going to talk about consent in just a second. But if you have these little check boxes at the bottom of your order that would just like, there are plugins that even do this, right? They automatically opt you into something. There's no automatic opt-ins anymore, right? Get rid of your automatic opt-ins. You can still have an opt-in, but let's not make it automatic, right? In fact, you should not make it automatic, right? Because it is not the same thing as the way in which we're defining consent these days, right? People have to choose to check the box, not the other way around, not have the box automatically checked and then they have to opt out, right? This is a game where people have to opt in. And so if you're going to push their information to someone else, right, so they can send out newsletters or whatever, hey, they have to opt in. And then, of course, they have to see all the things they've opted into so they can come back in and edit it, opt out of something, change their mind on something. That's the consent that often happens when you get to the my account, right? If you get to my account and you're like, oh, these are all the newsletters that I was subscribed to, right? Let me go back in and opt out. This was the thing that happened, right? When all of a sudden Twitter and everybody else was sending out all their privacy policies. I got the email too, and I said, okay, let me go to Twitter and let me go see what's going on here. And all of a sudden I said, oh, I don't know what the privacy and safety settings are, right? And so I went into Twitter and I went into, there's privacy and settings. I go, oh, great. But here's the thing. In that list of privacy settings, there was another one that said personalization. And I went, huh, what's that? Right? So I clicked into it and it said, oh, hey, we can personalize the ads. And you're like, okay, that makes sense. Then it says, I don't know if you know this, right? But you're already like, it's already marked off as like toggled on, personalized based on the places you've been. And I go, wait. You're tracking where I've been? No, I don't like that. So I had to uncheck it. Then it said, oh, hey, track where you see Twitter content across the whole web. And I go, nope. And then it said, track and share your data with all of Twitter's business partners. All right, nope. But these are all pre-checked. And then it said, right, the apps you use on your devices. And I'm like, what are you talking about? So Twitter on my phone is looking at all the other apps I use on my phone to make recommendations. I'm like, no, I don't want you to know any of that. Uncheck, right? So the reality is when people start going into my account and actually working through their consent, looking over what they have been already subscribed to or what they've already been assigned to, and they have to have that ability to uncheck, right? They have to have that ability to unsubscribe, to say, nope, I'm sorry. I don't know how we got to this place, but this isn't a place that I want to live in, right? They have to have that ability to say, no, thank you. And that's what we're talking about. So in that realm, right, let's talk about consent. What is consent, right? Consent is freely given, right? This is the notion that I choose. Yes, I would like your newsletter. Yes, I would like your coupons. Yes, I would like whatever it is, right? Yes, I would like it. That's freely given. Not, I got to give you this in order to get this, right? I need to give you my email so that I can get a coupon or so that I can get access to a report or whatever, right? It's the notion of my consent is I'm choosing to do this. It also needs to be specific. If I'm saying, yes, here's my email for the order that I'm making, that's not the same as here's my email, put me into every newsletter that you have ever thought about making, right? It's not the same thing. Then it has to be informed. I have to know, what are you doing? What's your intention, right? With clarity, right? Which is the next one, right? Unambiguous. I need clarity. I don't need a lot of verbal mumbo jumbo. I need to know, right? And then lastly, the affirmative action. That means I specifically am clicking something. I am moving my cursor over a button and pushing it. I am going to a checkbox and checking it. I am doing very specific action that is affirmative. This is wonderful. I don't know if you've paid attention to what MailChimp has been doing, right? MailChimp already released a 7 to 10 page ebook on how they're working with GDPR. They've been involved in this for over a year. They have really been working on this, right? And I like all the work they're doing, right? And one of the things that they can now do is they can tell you what has happened with each person, right? This is when they got the email. This is when they opened the email. This is when they clicked the link in the email. This is when they came back to do, right? And they have all that data for you. Why is that important? Because later when you go back to, when they say, oh, I never gave affirmative action. I never actually said, I never even got this product, or I never joined this membership, or I never did what, and you're like, actually you did, right? And MailChimp is a good partner to have with you in that, because they're like, here, we'll give you the data. Right now, it's still a pain in the butt, right? Because let's say my buddy Sean Hesketh runs WP 101, which is a great online course for learning WordPress. And someone went and did a fraudulent claim, one of those like, hey, I never got this. And so Sean had to do the work, right? To say, look, I can go into Lifter LMS and collect the data about when you took these courses. I can log into MailChimp and collect when you subscribe to this, when you got this receipt, when you actually opened this email, and the reminder of starting this course, right? I can show when you click this link. But he had to do all that work, right? And you go, oh, that's a pain. But the good news is some of our partners are starting to do this really, really well, because they want to be able to say, this is when you took the affirmative action. This is when you said yes to this explicitly on this date and on this time. And you go, okay, that's good news for us, right? So now we get into it, right? Which is the what do we need to be thinking about, right? What do we need to pay attention to? And I'll tell you, right, we're going to go over just eight places where you should be thinking about GDPR and your WooCommerce store, right? The first is your terms and conditions page, right? Do you have clear articulation of how it's going, what you're doing, and is there a link to your privacy policy? Because the privacy policy is really where you're going to talk about their data, right? But does your terms and conditions page have a link, right, to your privacy policy? If you do, and people can traverse it and get to your privacy policy, then you're ready to move to the next one, which is, hey, is your data collection, is your processing, and are your data storage dynamics super clear, really articulate for customers? Do they understand, right? Some of you have been storing data forever, right? And some of it you don't even need, and you're like, oh no. And Google is moving this way, right? Google's going to start defining how long you keep it and then where it clears it off, because you're like, yeah, I really don't want to be the one that is the source of all your data for the rest of your life. So your privacy policy should be clear on what you're collecting, what you're doing with it, how long you're saving it, right? Then you get into cart abandonment and recommendation emails, right? Are you getting the consent? Are people clearly, unambiguously giving you the affirmative action that says they are comfortable sending emails, right? You sending them reminder emails. And one of the ways that you can mitigate this, though again, I think this is a best practice across the board, but one of the things that you can think about is, hey, when you collect that email, don't put it into your third-party system until you've gotten the address of where they're shipping something or where they're paying for something, right? And if you're looking at their address and their shipping or billing address is US based, right? Well, then you're like, okay, I'm in a slightly different situation than if it was I'm sending this to Ireland, right? But in general, right, my case is this is still best practice, right? And so you should get consent and make it clear, make it super clear. This is what we're doing, right? In case you get distracted, in case you don't finish up, we want to remind you, we want to, circle back to you. Now, you don't have to put all that right next to the place where you put in the email and the button, or else suddenly every form is going to get massive. But you do have to be clear right there, right, in its intent, and then you can say, hey, for more details, right, click here, and you can move them on to something else. Product reviews, right? Product reviews. Who's seeing it? Who's filling it out? Who have you gotten consent from? Right? Like, you can, if you make it so that product reviews are only by verified owners, meaning you can only write a review if you've made the purchase. And then you even do things like, okay, when you're going to write the review, I'm going to get the consent. Say, hey, heads up, this is what we're going to do with it. This is how we're storing it. This is then product reviews make a ton of sense, right? But if you're not doing that work, right, then you may want to think through how much and how are these product reviews working, right? I tell store owners anyway, right? Product reviews are really powerful when you have them, right? Having the feature without any of the product reviews doesn't do you a lot and may open things up for you. So you just want to look at, how do we do this? Thankfully, WooCommerce gives you the ability to say, hey, product reviews should only be for people who are purchasers. And so then you can say, okay, now let me just go add a little blurb around the consent before they hit submit on this, and I should be in a much better place. Customer accounts, right? Are you collecting data and reviewing that and saying, hey, do I still need it? And when I present it, right, am I making sure that they have access to see everything that I have and they can manipulate it or kill it, right? What am I doing with my customer accounts? How am I presenting it? These are things you want to be paying attention to, right? Comments, right? Do you have your privacy policy and your cookie opt-ins before people comment, right? I think my next edition of chrislema.com just won't even have comments because it's a lot easier, right? For me, I like, if I don't get a lot from the comments, I might just say, nope, I don't need them. But if you do use them, right, make sure that there is clarity and that people can opt in, right? External reporting. Hey, if there is a certain amount of data that we need to run an e-commerce store, right? I need to know certain information, especially while the order is pending. But even after the order is pending, if I have warranties or other things where I need to keep certain information, you go, okay, I need that. That's just the nature of the beast. But then you get into, well, no, customer wants to be anonymized. And so we have, for example, in our managed WooCommerce platform, we're building out the ability for a customer to be anonymized. So please forget me. And we're forgetting certain things, right? Like their name and their email and their first name, last name, their email, their phone number, things like that. But maybe the city and zip of the purchase are still being saved so that we can do other kinds of reports. But then what happens when you get into external systems, right? External systems push that data from WooCommerce into an external system like Glue. And Glue, our partners there, said, oh yeah, we're on it too. We've managed this and that. So when you anonymize it on your end, it'll come across and be anonymized again on our end. And you go, that's great. You go, but don't you have another system, right? Don't you have an integration with MailChimp? So doesn't that data get pushed over there? And they go, you're right. We have to look at that. We got to make sure that if you anonymize, we know we'll anonymize, but will it pass on to MailChimp to anonymize over there? And I go, yeah, but here's the thing. I don't even really want to anonymize over there. I want them removed because I want to pay for a seat of a person and it's going to a fake email or no email. This is the nature of the beast that you got to pay attention to. And this is why when I tell people there is no magic plugin that'll do everything, is because it's more complicated than that, right? You have to hit all sorts of places and work through all sorts of dynamics, right? And then my favorite system, right? The one that comes up unassuming quietly behind us, right? For years, we were talking about online courses and using online courses as a major driver of business, and using online courses connected to WooCommerce too, right? Whether you're talking about WP Commerce or you're talking about LearnDash, you're talking about Lifter LMS, you're talking about Sensei, all of these are plugins that allow you to sell access to courses. And you go, yeah, here's the thing though. Most of these plugins collect student progress as a way to trigger additional emails, right? You've all been in a course where you get through course 1 and they send you a congratulations, now let's go to course 2. Or you've spent like, I don't know, 20 days not logging in, and they go, hey, we haven't seen you logged in, right? Or let's get you in and do the last 2 steps to finish course number 2, or section chapter number 2. Well, that's all student tracking. And most of that data doesn't get exposed through my account. Most of that data doesn't get exposed through the plugin itself. Most of that data is just sitting under there being part of what they collect to be able to do the thing they do. And you go, hold on. This isn't good, right? Because now it's not exposed. Now a customer can't see it. They can't delete it. They can't edit it. They can't change it. They can't do anything. And even if they want to be removed, right, you may or may not have the hooks. LearnDash does, but many of the others don't have the hooks to go in and clear it out. And you go, oh, this is not helpful. So these are all areas for you to think about, right, as you do this. And the most important part of this is this notion of controllers and processors. The way to think about that, right, is that your website, if you're running an e-commerce store, your website is the main place where people are, you're collecting their information and data, but you pass it on to others. You pass it on to others who do work with it. And even though you are responsible for what you do, you are also somewhat responsible for what they're doing and issues they have. And again, I want to highlight, I am not a lawyer. I'm not trying to give you legal advice. The business advice I give you is make sure you pay attention to what's going on with your partners. Make sure that you know who the GDPR contact is over there, right? Or the data privacy person is over there. Make sure that you are paying attention to how you're going to do your workflows, right? How you're going to do your business process. What happens if you have a breach? What happens if they have a breach? What happens if you're collecting the wrong information? Or what happens when you're collecting the right information and anonymizing people correctly and then passing it on to them? Are they also dealing with it correctly, right? You have to pay attention to this. So we've been working on a little plugin, right? We've been working for now 4 to 6 months. If you know Andrew Norcross, he only goes by Norcross. Norcross, when I gave Norcross the assignment back in November, I said, here's what we're gonna do. And like every developer, he was like, okay, how long do I have, right? And I said, May. Now, you give a developer something like May when he's being given an assignment at the beginning of November, and he's like, that's like, this is amazing. I have all the time in the world. And you go, right, but there's a whole lot to think through and work on. One of the first things we wanted to do was really pay attention to the opt-in fields, right? And the opt-in fields allow you to go in and say, I want to create a new title. I want to create a label for that. And I want to add that item. And so it'll give me, right, the title, it'll give me the label, but based on that field name, I'm going to create a hook. Now, this is not solving everything for you. This is simply creating a hook so that a developer can use that to say, hey, based on what they check, right? Based on what they check, what am I going to do with it, right? A lot of what's going on with GDPR as it relates to WordPress and as it relates to WooCommerce is there are people doing GDPR work in WordPress. There are people doing GDPR work for WooCommerce, but they're only doing little different angles, different things they're doing. Like the WordPress folks are focusing on privacy policy, and you go, great. They're going on, here's some guidelines to put in the plugin developers book, and you go, great. But guys, that's not the same as fixing your actual store, right? And so we said, no, we're not gonna be able to do everything and fix everything, but let's make sure that we're creating the right hooks so that we can expose and get affirmative action consent, right? And at the same time, make that hook available so that someone else can go do something with it, right? And you go, yeah, okay, let's go make that happen. So this is over at liquidweb-woocommerce-GDPR on the liquidweb GitHub repo, right? That's one part of it. When you do this, right, when you create these, it actually shows up, right, over here. You'll see here on the bottom right, it'll show, hey, you always get the T's and C's, but now it'll go, hey, those statements that we were making before, right? I want to do these things, right? Yeah, I want, news or updates related to the product that is in this purchase, or I want to get coupons or hear about specials, which is different than I want to get your company newsletter, which is different than, hey, if you have any one-time offers based on my purchase, right? That one-time, upsell that you want to do or cross-sell, predicate that. Yeah, I want to be able to do that. So let's make sure that I get the checkbox on it, right? Now, is this the model? Is this the pattern? Is this the interface we're going to see across the web for this feature? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know, right? I can't predict that. But what I do know is that when you used to have just one checkbox, right, that says, hey, keep me updated, that wasn't very clear. It wasn't unambiguous, right, about what I was signing up for. Was I signing up for coupons, or was I signing up for the newsletter, or was I signing up for one-time offers? I didn't know what I was signing up for, right? And so we wanted to work on how do we make that available to you. At the same time, right, we want to be able to show you those same opt-ins in privacy data, right? When you come into the My Account and be able to say, hey, you know what? These are the things you've opted in before. You can still uncheck those, right? And update it. And of course, we can export your data. You can download the files. We're doing a lot with being able to get that data portability going, exposing the data, getting it out to you. And you'll notice here, it's not just orders, it's also your comments and your reviews, right? So if you've been generating content on the platform, we want to help you. We are not the only people, though, that are working on compliance, right? And particularly GDPR and WordPress. There are 3 others at least. There may be more that I don't know about, but 3 others at least in 2 of them in the regular WordPress repo, plus one at GDPRWP.com, where we are, we're seeing people work on this. But I will give you the caveat, the reminder at the bottom here that you see, which is no plugin will automatically make your store GDPR compliant. If someone's promising you that they'll make you GDPR compliant, run away, right? That is definitely not what's going on. So with the last few minutes that I have as we've been going through all this, I wanted to circle back to that question. Hey, can they really come after me, right? Now, of course, if you have an office in the EU that's part of what you're doing, yeah, that they got you right there, right? If you have a bank account there, even if you don't have necessarily an office, right? You're funneling your money through Ireland because you get better tax rates, right? Yeah, they probably still got you there. But what if you don't? What if you don't have any of those, right? What if you're not actively selling to people in Europe, and every now and then someone from Europe shows up and buys something, but predominantly you're in the US, right? Can they really come after you? A lot of people, when the GDPR stuff first came out, they started treating it like the VAT stuff that came out a couple years ago. Like, nah, this is not for us. It doesn't matter. Someone at the State Department was like, we have our own privacy laws, and you're like, yeah. The State Department's not where I'd be paying attention to it, right? I'd be paying attention to the FTC. But you go, yeah, there's all this stuff, noise about should I or shouldn't I? Does it apply to me or do I not? Right? You got all this stuff going on, and I go, you know what? Before we get into all of that, right? Before we get into all that, let's do a little thought experiment, right? One that we just spend just a second paying attention to, and that is this, right? I want you to imagine that you want to buy whatever it is that you like or want, right? Whether it's boots, tennis shoes, a hat, a cigar lighter, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is that you want to buy, I want you to think about that, right? And then you go and you say, hey, I go to this store, and when I get to this store, right, things pop up, and I fill in something. I don't know what's going on. I went and I bought the lighter, I bought the shoes, and then all of a sudden that same address, I'm getting other emails back at me. I'm doing all this retargeting, but through email also, as well as the web and on Facebook. And you're like, it's all over the place, and I'm overwhelmed with a sense that I don't really understand what's going on with my data, with my order, with anything. I'm uncomfortable with how my data is being used. And then the alternative is I go to a different store where there's a whole lot of clarity, where there's no ambiguity, where I'm invited to participate with as much or as little desire as I have to share my information. And I do that at the second store. And then I only get the emails that I expected to get. I don't get my name sold anywhere else. I don't get it on tons of other lists with tons of other emails. And I don't get a whole bunch of coupons and newsletters that I never signed up for. My question to you, right, is which store would you go back to? Because the truth is, my perspective, and it's simply mine, is that more and more stores are going to take the GDPR as not just a regulation. They're going to take it as a best practice. And as they take it as a best practice, more and more stores are going to change. And then if your store is the only one who hasn't, or one of the few that hasn't, and you're sitting here standing on the notion that, frankly, you don't have to, and no one's going to come after you, and they can't really impose a fine on you, and all that other good stuff, will it matter? Because if everybody else is treating customers and their data in this new way, giving customers these rights, and you're not, isn't that going to be a problem in and of itself? Aren't you going to struggle even if you don't get fined? That's why I waited to the end of this, right, to say this. That's why I didn't dig into the whole, does it apply to you or not at the beginning of this? Because frankly, as we walk through all of this stuff, yeah, some of it is going to be hard. Some of it's going to change what we do. Some of it's going to be work. But fundamentally, there is nothing in this list that I don't look at and I go, yeah, there's nothing in here I look at as egregious. I look at this stuff and I go, that's exactly how I would want to be treated. That is exactly the right way to think about my data. Yeah, so this is just best practice. And if everybody else is following best practice, I don't think you want to be the only store that isn't, simply because you don't have to. So my general take is start paying attention, get involved, start talking to people, talk to a lawyer, talk to your partners, and start making a move to treat the data that is moving through your e-commerce store with the respect and privacy that it deserves. My name is Chris Lema. You can find me on Twitter at Chris Lema. I work obviously at Liquid Web, and you will, because you signed up for this, you'll get a copy of these slides, and I think even the recording, in case you want to go over it again or share it with your friends, talk with your coworkers about it, right? I think we have a couple questions in here, but I also know that we are getting ready to wrap up the time. So I'm going to look over this real quick and see if, so one question was, hey, is this only e-commerce and specifically WooCommerce? But what if you're running e-commerce and not WooCommerce? Yeah, these slides, while trying to tackle all the different touch points where your WooCommerce store is in play, it's not specific. I mean, like you would want to pay attention to these things in any e-commerce environment. So that's not just specific to WooCommerce, though. That's how we're playing that out here. All right, I have another question that says, hey, hold on here. I'm going through these. I see that a lot of you could see the slides. That's really good. Now I'm realizing these are not questions. This is how you got me the information back, which is good. Would it be possible to have a store that requires consent to use the store or service? Yeah, you can do that. If a user opts out of a specific component, store emails for account validation, then the cost of that to them is to opt out of the service entirely. Well, that's where you probably would talk to a lawyer, because honestly, one of the notions here is that they can opt out of their data getting processed and still be able to use your system. And so if you're going to bounce them straight out, you may be creating an exposure point for yourself, but I wouldn't be the best guy to answer that. You would really want to talk to a lawyer. Is it possible to do it? And specifically in the situation I was talking about, where you create a membership environment for wholesalers or whatever, that part of it, you go, yeah, I can do that. I can make that happen. But if you're going to say, hey, if you don't do this, then you can't use my store, you may be creating an issue. Jeff, hey, Jeff, good to see you here. Jeff said, hey, using MailChimp automation to drip emails to customers who paid to register, sort of like a membership. Can we do this, assuming we make it clear? So in general, assuming you make anything clear, right? Yes, you can. You can say, hey, give me your email, especially in that case. If someone is paying to get a series of emails and you're saying, now give me the email so I can put it in my system so that we can send you these emails, you can totally do that. You just want to be really, really clear and make sure that they know what they're getting. But there's nothing wrong with sending email, especially to someone who gave you the information. You just want to make sure that everything's on the up and up there, right? Then I want to be able to share these recordings or slides with coworkers in my office. Yep, you can totally do that. That's not a problem. The plugin is very cool. That's cool, Philip. I'm really glad you like it. Can you please comment on how all of this will affect eBay and Amazon sellers who receive personal information to fulfill orders? That is an excellent question. And I don't have an excellent answer for that. I am not well versed in the specific agreement that sellers make to be on the Amazon or eBay platform. Unfortunately, that is a space we're just digging into as we start figuring out omni-channel e-commerce and how to put your WooCommerce products out into those environments. But I have not spent a lot of time with those agreements, and so I don't know what's in those agreements, and I don't know what provisions are already there to protect data or not. Maybe the best thing I could tell you is, hey, heads up. If you don't need the data, don't have the data. If you don't need to keep it after you've used it, don't keep it. Just limit your exposure as much as you can, because you don't want to be on the list of suspects when something else happens. But specifically as it relates to eBay and Amazon sellers, I don't know. I spend way more of my time in WooCommerce than I do over there. And so you'd have to talk to someone else. With that, I want to thank you guys. Thanks for being on, and have a great day. Take care.